Hello, my name is Mark Prather, and this is my co-host, Ralph Linzmeier. And welcome to our show, God, Wisdom, and Money. The sponsors for our show are Visionary Real Estate Opportunities, Mark One Mortgage, and Real Estate Wealth Advisors. The purpose of our show is to explore God, His wisdom, and how to have a great life in pursuit of love, happiness, and success. Before we get started, Ralph, help us with a prayer.
Okay. To God, we need you. Our intimacy with you determines the impact of our lives. Father God, transform us into individuals with Jesus in us, in our hearts. Turn our duty into delight until we know there's nothing better than worshiping you and transforming us into the continually generosity that you inspire in our lives. Father God, transform us into the love of Jesus.
All right. In Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Thank you, Ralph. Awesome. All right. You can see our gentleman in the front. Our special guest is Dr. John Sottosanti. Dr. John is author of Mortal Adhesions. This is his book, Mortal Adhesions. It's a surgeon's battle, the 7 deadly sins to find faith, happiness, and inner peace. The book is on Amazon. John is a surgeon, scientist, researcher, teacher, patent holder, entrepreneur, and Catholic philanthropist. Quite an accomplished gentleman. Although now retired from his profession, he spends his days sharing with others what the Catholic faith did for him. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate being here. Thank you, Ralph.
So, first question for you is, what is the core message that you wanted to bring to people? Tell us a little bit about your purpose, but what's kind of the root message you wanted to share with people in your book?
Well, the basic message is that to be really happy in life, it isn't money, power, and prestige that everybody goes after. Not that you don't want to have a certain amount of those things, but they shouldn't be in the forefront of your life. And I was never really into my faith whatsoever. In fact, I'm not sure that I even believed in God when I was in my younger days. So I spent my early years after graduating from college basically not only becoming a surgeon, but setting up an amazing empire. I had 52 employees in a small surgical practice by bringing in other surgeons and the support staff and growing the square footage of our office space, et cetera. And that brought me what most people would consider success, wealth, power, prestige, and I should have been very happy. I think that most people would say, you had it all. Why aren't you happy? You must be happy. The problem is I wasn't. Because what happens is the more successful you are, the more you open yourself up to some negative things. And we throw around the term, the 7 deadly sins, and I put it on the title of my book because I think we all have a tendency to have every single one of those 7 deadly sins. And so my book is a story of how, when I really reached bottom, that God showed that He really does exist and that He really cares about us. And He did some unbelievable things. And I smile to say, a lot of people will say, well, John, you can't be telling the truth. Those things could not have happened. But when you look at my track record, I practiced surgery in the same community for like 45 years, didn't move around, married to the same woman over 50 years, wrote 30-something papers in the scientific literature. So I'm a scientist, and I don't have a history of telling stories and lies. So when I look at anybody and I say, this is what happened, this is what God did for me, and this is why I believe in Him, I want to tell my story.
So John is curious, those early years, and we transformed. But what was the thing that really inspired you during those years? And were you ever seeking wisdom? What was the thing that fired you up, and what's transitioned to today?
Well, thanks, Ralph. No, I in the beginning, I was dealing with a self-esteem problem. I was a son of an Italian immigrant growing up in New England, which was a very, I call it waspish community, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and the Italian immigrants were looked down upon. And so my father preached to me that you want to be respected. And the way that you get respect is that you get college degrees and you make a lot of money, and then people will respect you. So deep down, I was overcoming some insecurities as growing up as a son of Italian immigrant. And I just wanted to achieve. And God gave me the talent to study hard and pass exams and do whatever I needed to do. And I just ran it to extremes.
Now, John, talking about your father and the upbringing you had, where would you say God and faith was kind of on a 1 to 10 in your house growing up?
Well, we almost split the house. And we talk about Mom, she was probably an 8, 9, maybe a 10 occasionally, and Dad was more of a 2, 3. Dad was concerned about money and how he was looked upon in the community. Those were the really important things. But interesting enough, and I talk about it in the book a lot, God reached out to him and actually gave him what some people would call miracles. And he became a believer, certainly well before he died. But it wasn't because of Dad, and research shows this. If the father is not religious or faithful or church going or whatever, the children very often are not either, and they don't continue later on going to church. So it's important to have both parents involved.
Yes.
Really. So yeah.
John, it's so fascinating because just a moment ago you spoke about money, and it was one of the inspirations in your lives.
Right.
But we've been told by in 1 Timothy that the love of money is the source of all evil in this world. Let's get to this topic, money, because it was an inspiration. What do you think about money today?
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Well, I think to talk about what it means about today is to go back and talk a little bit more about what it meant to me then.
Sure.
Because I was 41 years old, and I started in a small blue-collar town in Connecticut, and fast forward a number of years, graduated from an Ivy League college, I went through dental school, then became a surgeon in my profession, doing oral bone reconstructive surgery at a time, when there's a tremendous need, and that could generate lots of income. And I utilized my time well, and by the time I was 41, I had a house overhanging the ocean, I say, because I could hear the waves hitting the shore in La Jolla, California, which is a wonderful community. And I call it the Beverly Hills of San Diego. I had new Mercedes-Benz. I had Hollywood actresses and actors and Nobel Prize winners, including Francis Crick, the discoverer of DNA, was my patient for 20 years. I had everything going. USC sent me around the world to lecture at their expense. And so those things were really important to me at that time of my life.
Well, what about your happiness and kind of emotional well-being? Because you have, from a worldly perspective, you pretty much had it all. But how did that correlate? Because with our show, what we're trying to help, the three of us have chased success and money as hard as pretty much most people could.
Over a career, honestly.
Yeah, we've all pursued it real hard, and a lot of times, it's easy to get lost. Getting lost in the worldly things, and so the happiness factor is not so much. So tell us your experience with that, as far as where were you with kind of happiness, balance, joy in life, and then the money part of it.
Okay. Well, I think what we have to do is understand what happiness really is. And the word gets thrown around a lot. I want to be happy. Well, I would then ask that person, define happiness. Is there a difference between fleeting happiness and enduring happiness? And I want now, as I understand it, I want enduring happiness. I want depth. And so Fleeting happiness is, okay, you buy a new car and you love the leather smell. That's just wonderful. But in 6 months, the smell is gone and the guy next door has a better car than you have. So is that really happiness? So I went through all those phases. Even the ocean view. I mean, the first year it was unbelievable looking out and watching the white water hit the sands of La Jolla Shores. But be honest with you, after the first year, I hardly ever looked at it anymore. And I could go through every single one of those things, and I was addicted to all the sins. Gluttony. I mean, I became a wine connoisseur, and then I would go to expensive restaurants like Charlie Trotter's in Chicago. I mean, that was a big deal to me to spend that much money for these small portions of food. Maybe lots of courses, but each one really was a masterpiece. But it meant everything to me back then. And today, it doesn't mean anything. And that doesn't mean I won't go to a good restaurant. It just doesn't have that appeal, as I have an understanding of what's really important in life. So back then, because most of my support system for happiness was relatively shallow, when the bad things began happening to me, and I wasn't thinking that I was going to have any bad things happen. I think that's the way a lot of young people are. It's like, you think, hey, this is great. I'm going to go to a party. I'm going to meet this gal. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And everything is going to be great forever, but it isn't going to be that way. I built this empire in the business, and then I had an embezzler in the business. It took us for lots of money. Then we wanted to expand into a new building. We hired a contractor. We had to pay a third down, a third in the middle, a third at the end. Totally paid him off. It was a beautiful building. And 1 week after opening up our business in that building, letters from attorneys started coming in because he never paid his subcontractors.
Oh boy.
And then we were being sued by all the subcontractors. So we had to pay double. We had to pay off the subcontractors and pay the lawyers. And it was just unbelievable stress. And these things started happening all at once until I really reached a point of anxiety, depression, and to some extent, probably despair. I had chronic back pain, neck pain. I could not play golf anymore. And life just wasn't fun.
John, we all have yearnings. And God probably has yearnings. I'm not sure God does, but he's yearning for us. He's yearning for intimacy with each of us, with you. But there was a transition point because you had yearnings for money and yearnings for the world. And all of a sudden you started seeing things a little differently. What was that transition?
Well, I had reached this point again with the pain, et cetera, and the frustration and maybe despair. And I had an upcoming meeting with a partner who I was not getting along with. And I was just feeling so tense, and I just needed to cry out. It was just the first time in my life I ever did that. And I'm in my Mercedes-Benz, and the roof is open. I can close my eyes and remember the scene. And I looked up through the sunroof, and it was a dark sky with endless stars. And I looked up there and I said, God, if you are up there, because I didn't know if God even existed. If you are up there, all I want is inner peace. And those words just flowed out because that's truly what I wanted. I didn't want any more money or any more success. All I wanted was inner peace. But then I said, please help me. And in other words, I was submitting to God. And I think that's really important because I've read other books and other people have gone through the same thing. And being open to God, God will not force himself upon us. You have to be open to God and ask for God's help. So anyway, what happened was the very next day, something unusual happened. I had an upcoming meeting with my partner, and I wasn't looking forward to it. It was in Palm Springs, which is probably a 2-3 hour drive from San Diego. And I thought, let's get a book on tape so I could listen to it. So I was looking for a novel. And I go to the bookstore on the rack, and I spin the thing, and all of a sudden this book comes up, Love is Letting Go of Fear. And I didn't even know what that meant. So I said, well, it says 10 steps to happiness, so maybe I need to be happy, so I'll listen to it. It introduced me to Christian principles. It wasn't any particular denomination, but it introduced me to Christian principles. And so I listened to it and I felt some peace. So I said to my partner a day before the trip, would you please listen to this? It was about 3 hours long. And he did. We went to the meeting in Palm Springs and it was the best meeting we've ever had. We both ended up great. And a week later, he shows up at my house with a gift all wrapped up, open it up, and it's a book. And I opened it up to the publisher, and it was The Foundation for Inner Peace. It was like, ooh,
Signal.
is there somebody up there? And then it didn't end there. I really enjoyed that author, and I read 3 or 4 of his books, and I had his books on tape in the car so that I could ingrain in my mind those thoughts. And I knew his voice so well.
So just let me interject one thing, because this request of God, sometimes we need to pursue those so often. Like I Jesus, help me. I say that so often, and when I stay after, Jesus, you take care of everything, it's transformative. But if I just do it once, it just doesn't quite work as well.
No, absolutely, totally agree with you. So,
well, John, let me address something to you. A few things stand out to me that I want to kind of recap for you and get your comments on. First, you were chasing the world, but you had, by most people's standards, in their mind, making as much money as you're making, living where you're living the lifestyle you're living, they're like, well, life doesn't get any better than that. And yet you're like, when I have basically everything, and I'm crashing right now. I'm emotionally crashing. And you use the word submit, and so my question on submit is, did you surrender? Was that a surrender moment? So from what was really, you were like, say, emotionally crashing, and now were you surrendering at that moment to God? What was going on right there?
For me, it doesn't happen that easy, because I'd love to say,
Most of us.
okay, I'm now a holy person and I'm going to go ahead and follow all the rules, etc. I mean, I had built this empire and I was quite happy in it, I thought. Obviously, it wasn't good enough because I was suffering from a lot of problems. I mean, it was all stress related. So getting back to, is God really up there? God knew that I needed a number of experiences to truly believe. And so I was saying that I was listening to this guy's voice, and I'm at the airport with my son in San Francisco, and I hear his voice, like in my ears, like, what's going on here? Where's that coming from? And I look up, and there's a man with his back to me. He's talking on, back then, it was a phone on the wall. And it was his voice. This guy's first name was Jerry. And I said, Jerry, as he's walking away. And I didn't expect he'd ever turn around, because the odds of me meeting the author that I wanted to meet, I was reading his book. He turns around and says, there you are. It turns out he thought I was his ride who hadn't shown up. But we were able to talk for half an hour. He caught me to my wife and my partner and his wife, 4 of us, to a seminar, all 3-day weekend seminar in the San Francisco area on Christian principles and taking care of people who need your help, like kids with cancer, patients with AIDS. And this is back at a time when we didn't understand that disease so much. But the amazing thing, to put that author right there in front of me, and that started a series of events that took place. But my wife was very religious, and she eventually, along with a good friend, convinced me to go to Bible study. So that helped. And then I went to a Catholic Cursillo weekend, which is a bunch of men on a mountain where you spend time learning about faith, and there's different expressions of faith, but it was a Catholic retreat. So Jesus Christ was the center of it. And all of a sudden I began forming a relationship with Christ. And it then went on to eventually the Camino de Santiago that you guys know about, and it's in my book, featured quite well. Do you want to hear about that now, or do you?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that I really look forward to having grandkids at this point in my life. I had a married son, and he and his wife decided they wanted to have children. And they were our only hope at that point in time for children. So when she miscarried twice, and then I get a phone call saying, the doctor just told us we'll probably never have children. It was like this giant void in my life. And I was used to hearing about a problem, figuring out how to solve the problem, and then going in and doing it and solving the problem. Well, how do you solve this problem? There's only one person that could solve this problem, that was God. And unbelievably, somehow or another, I happened to get a book about a walk across Spain, all the way from France to northwest Spain, of the city of Santiago de Compostela, where the bones of St. James are buried.
500 miles.
500 miles. And you get a big certificate if you do it all. And you have two choices. Most people walk it. And that takes about 4 to 6 weeks. And some people will bike it in 2 weeks. And you still get your diploma either way. And I said, I can take 2 weeks off from work. I can't take 6 weeks off from work. So I planned a bike trip, and again, God put something in my hands, which was a story in one of my books about Queen Isabella of Spain. She went through the same thing my daughter-in-law did. She went through miscarriages, went something like 7 years without having a son that she really wanted. She had a daughter from 7 years earlier. She heard about a saint on the Camino de Santiago called Juan de Ortega, and she goes and makes a pilgrimage to that saint's tomb and prays for a baby, and she ends up getting pregnant immediately and having a son 9 months later. I said, that's a pretty good story. I think I'd like to go do that trip. I'd like to bike it, and I found 3 other friends that would do it with me, and so that's what we did. And all I can tell you is I said to God, and I was not used to praying or talking to God, but I said to God, I'm going to go on this trip to Spain, and I know I've got to climb 3 mountain ranges, and I'm not in that great of a shape, and I don't know if I can do it, and there's going to be a lot of pain involved, but I'll do it for you, Lord. But I really I'm going to ask you for a grandchild. And that's what I did. And I said, I promise I will never get in the van, because we paid money to have a support van and provide us with bikes. And they were always saying, well, I know you're not supposed to get in a van, but if you're really hurting, we can take you up the mountain. And most of the people in our group, which is about 12 or 15, climbed in the van at one point or another. But I would never get in that van. I felt I would sacrifice as much as I had to. In fact, I had a major bike accident the morning that I went into San Juan de Ortega to pray for a grandchild. And I literally limped on a bicycle into the town because I wouldn't get into the van, go into a deep, dark tomb. And the moment I got in there, I felt the presence of God. I don't know how I could describe that to you. All I know is that it seemed like it was a holy place. And I go into this dark tomb and I can't see anything, but I knelt down, and then these votive candles, little red candles, were on the floor. And I could begin to see the casket of the saint. It was right down there below me. Now, that's the same spot, Queen Isabella of Spain. Now, the year was 1477, I believe, or thereabouts. She sent Columbus over in 1492 to America. So that's the Queen Isabella. So there's a lot of history pertaining to this lady. So I'm there looking at the tomb, and I start praying. God, I'd really like to have a grandchild. And then I'd say an Our Father, Hail Mary, and an act of contrition I had learned as a child, so I knew those 3 prayers, and I said them. And then I look up, and I could see there was a cross on the far wall. So I look at the cross as I continued saying those 3 prayers, and all of a sudden, a small cross was superimposed on the big cross. And it was a blazing cross. And I'm thinking, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, but where's it coming from? There must be light coming in from somewhere. And then it divides. So there's 1 cross, it divides. Now I'm looking at 3 crosses. And they divide, I'm looking at 5 crosses. They divide, I'm looking at 7 blazing crosses, each about 3 feet high. The big crosses maybe twice the size. And I'm thinking, those Spaniards are unbelievable. They've been to Disneyland. And when I came into this tomb, I tripped something. I tripped a beam. And it was on a time delay. It was on a time delay for 10 minutes. And then the crosses, there was a light show. I was sure of it. And because I had given many lectures myself, and I just knew there would be a hole in the wall and a projection beam projecting those crosses on the far wall. So I look around at the back wall. It was entirely solid, nothing at all. So now my scientific brain says, okay, I mean, God wasn't part of the answer at this point in time. There's something else. Those votive candles down below me are reflecting off of my glasses. Well, back then I only wore glasses to read. And so I reached to take them off and they weren't there. And now I'm saying, what could be causing those crosses? They were there. There was no heat. There was no smell. There was no smoke. And I found out later that 7, because there were 7 crosses, is a very spiritual number. It means completeness, a certainty. And that's what I felt. I felt certain that this was a message from God. And I looked, out there, to those that might be watching and said, all the belief system that I had up to that point changed because I could not come up with the answer. Every other thing in my life, I could come up with an answer for. It may not be right, but I thought it was right. And I couldn't come up with an answer. And I submitted. I said, God, thank you. And I knew that I would be a grandfather in 9 months. Oh. And that's what happened. Oh. 9 months later.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. I honestly, right now, telling you the story, I can feel like chills going down my neck.
Oh,
that's
so exciting. Yeah. It's interesting in life as we transition to things, all of a sudden we see new things. Now, Mother Teresa had a great mission. She was building the kingdom, but there was great need all around her. And she never really wanted to ask for money. What do you think the purpose of money in life is? I mean, it's just something else. There's a habit of giving sometimes people get into. And I know you're in that habit, right? And so, but it's fascinating. The purpose of money, John, after that discovery, what does it mean to you?
Well, Ralph, money, of course, is a method in which we provide for those we love, ourselves, our family. And back then, all I wanted to do was accumulate more money in the beginning. And now I realize that money and happiness, there is no direct relationship. Sometimes the more money you do have, the less happiness that you have, because who's your God? If your God is money.
The love of money, right?
Yeah, the love of money is, and I was terrible. I mean, little things like I buy a brand new Mercedes, I pull into a parking lot and somebody would open their door and I come back and there would be a white ding on my black car. And that would really upset me. And I would almost want to get even and scratch that guy's car. I was terrible. And today, I mean, I try to park away from people, but if I came out and found a thing in there, I'd say, okay, no big deal. I got to take it in the shop, or I got this guy that comes over to the house and he'll fix it in 15 minutes. It's not a big deal. And any excess money that I have, I really want to give it to show my love and concern for God's children.
It's interesting on this topic, though, because this habit of giving, the concept of staggering generosity. So this concept, we're in money, staggering generosity. Remember, the widow's pence. So in the Bible, it talks about how the widow gave away her tiny morsel.
Before we get into that, Rob, okay, because I want to keep the order. I want to follow up with a question on the point that you brought up, the point, the love of money. So I don't want to leave that. Okay. So let's hold that thought. Okay, because I'm going to come back to that. Because here's a question I want to ask you about to elaborate on what you were talking about with Rob brought up the point that the love of money. My question is, why do we love money? It's not the money. That's just paper, right? Mm-hmm. It's the status, it's the ego, sure, it's the pride, right? And you talk about that in your book. Tell us about what your feeling is in the relationship, kind of this struggle of love of money, but really the deeper level of pride and ego and status, and how to navigate that.
Yeah. That's a good question, Mark, because that's what really happens. I can remember back in those days when I was living above the ocean, in which at least once a year, if not twice a year, I would sit down and go over all my assets. I had made real estate investments. I had money in the stock market. You sit there and you got a certain amount of cash. So, you write it all up and you say, wow, this year I was able to increase my net worth by a certain percentage. I mean, those were very, very important things to me. And so the problem I find is that if you have a lot of money and along with that ego and power, you begin to lose sight of what's important.
All right, the next element I want to address is so that our viewers can get to know you, Ralph, much better. Now, I've known Ralph for some time now. Ralph has been one of the most successful financial advisors, asset managers, actually number one at one point in Orange County, just a premier success in money management at an extremely high level. And we have some really interesting world dynamics going on with the economy. And so, Ralph, why don't you give us kind of an overview of an assessment of the economy, what's going on with the global money management issues?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I've been retired now for quite a period of time, but I still have a perspective on the world. John, it's great seeing your perspective, and it's interesting. The world's changed pretty dramatically in just the last few years. Since the start of COVID, when COVID started, things changed dramatically. You might recall in the spring of 2020, when COVID hit, the market dropped about 45% in a matter of 2.5 weeks. It was shattering. We were headed into depression for sure. But the governments of the world responded. In the United States, we had a cumulative budget deficit of about $22 trillion at that time. Now, what they printed, the government's printed $11 trillion since that time. $11 trillion going into circulation creates a changing dynamic of the world. All this money is sloshing around, and where did inflation come from? It came out of that money printing, and the money printing is continuing today. This year, our budget deficit is about 7 to 8% of GDP. That's astounding. You generally don't see those kinds of deficits even in recessions. If we were to slip to a recession, John, Mark, there's a real problem. The deficit could go bigger. We could get 15 to 20% of GDP in a single year. What does that mean? Well, it means the world's changing. And so we're talking about God, we're talking about wisdom, and we're talking about the consequence of what's happening with money. Money's changed a lot. At one time, money was very important to it, but money has a purpose. Thank you, John. That was a really good insight. But what are we supposed to do with it? And then we have the responsibility of doing what we're supposed to do with money. So Mark, I know you have some perspectives. I'd love to share with everyone some of my insights, what will happen with money, but I think you have some perspectives you'd like to share on this as well.
Well, I want to dive deeper into a point that you just made, Ralph, that I think is really important. With respect to the debt load, in our lifetime, well, we can go back to the Clinton administration in the 90s, where they balanced the budget, right? The national balanced budget, basically no debt. That's not that long ago. But here we are 30 years later, and the philosophy on debt, national debt, international, it's totally different. And there's a thing called MMT, modern monetary theory. And that MMT theory is basically you can have an infinite amount of debt. So, Well,
by the way, Mark, you can have an infinite amount of debt for sure, as long as interest rates are zero.
Well, that's why I want you to.
As interest rates rise, the dynamics change dramatically. Recall, about 10 to 12 years ago, we had continuing budget deficits of about $200 billion. Today, we have a continuing budget deficit that's growing of about $2 trillion. The order of magnitude is astounding. The world is changing around us, but people are not quite aware of that. Those are the things that we need to kind of consider. We really always want to focus about God and wisdom and what that means. Our intimacy with God determines the impact of our lives. But even these other dynamics, if your heart is all about giving and generosity, it's still a factor in the world today.
Well, these issues that you're bringing up, Ralph, I think are critically important because we are in a different place. We have massive amounts of debt load. What is your feeling on this, Ralph, with respect to where we're going with the dollar, what's happening with gold, and where do you see the economy moving in the next year?
What's been happening over the last several years is interest rates have been rising. And with interest rates rising, the dollar has been relatively strong against a basket of world currencies. During that period, the Japanese yen, which is very indebted, Japanese yen has crashed. Okay, it's stabilizing the dollar somewhat, but we're getting very close to interest rates declining. Now, the world governments have started moving away from the dollar. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. As interest rates start to fall down, I believe the dollar is going to come under significant pressure. And so what does that mean? Well, I think we have an economy that's slowing into recession, but I believe that the central banks of the world will respond again with aggressive money printing. And when that happens, they'll come back with a surge. The economy will respond again positively, and inflation will pick up again. That's a big factor.
one of the concerns I have now, and John, I want you to kind of chime in on this, is that, I did a little study, and my background is in the real estate and mortgage industry and finance, and that we're Ralph's more of the stocks guy. But I did some research just the last few days and kind of updating. We're at a place right now on the affordability index where only 17% of first-time buyers can afford to buy a house in Orange County. I mean, that's a ridiculously low level. LA County is about 20%. So if you look at that, if only 17%, that means real estate sales they're not going to, people can't buy. And we have a unique dynamic right now, which very much mirrors the early 80s, which is people aren't selling because they have great interest rates, right? So inventory levels are staying low, and because inventory levels are staying low, that's why prices are staying high. So if you look at, and what my question is, and I want to get your take on this, John, is affordability. If people can't afford to buy houses, they're in debt, credit card levels are at record levels. And I saw something on the Wall Street Journal this morning that I thought was really interesting. And what that is that sales of products like Frito chips and things like that are down. I think it was Pepsi saying their sales are down 4%. So people aren't even buying the little cheapy things. How do you see this affordability problem impacting our let's say our local community anyway?
Yeah, no, it's a major problem. In fact, it's unfolding as we speak. Just last night on the evening news, there was information about some big cosmetic company and how they disappointed with their sales were dramatically off because people don't have the money to buy cosmetics. They're still spending money on travel, and because of COVID. I mean, you're locked in your house for 2 years. You want to travel. Ultimately, that's going to fall too, but it'll fall later because, again, travel is one of those things that almost side by side with, power and, ego. And it's like, if I can tell people I've been to 18 countries, I saw one guy give a TED talk and he said, I am so happy. I made a decision that in the next 5 years, I'm going to visit 50 countries. And I thought to myself, that's not going to make you happy. I've been there, done that. It's just not going to make you happy. So yeah, it's a real problem. I mean, I see it as a humanitarian crisis in which the homeless problem is just going to begin to grow. I mean, it's grown so much.
We have such serious problems servicing the debt in America, in the United States. The financing cost right now is approaching $1 trillion in 1 year. So we're talking about the cost of Medicare, the financing, and so we have another serious problem. Is because the dollar was weaponized with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We weaponized the dollar. That means we captured the Russian reserves, and Russia and China then aligned themselves to push against the dollar. And so the next thing is we need some sort of great reset coming in the future, and this reset will affect our money because the money has to be reset. There's just too much debt. So that's the transition we're going through. It represents more than likely significant inflation. During the decade of the 1970s, we had a long period of stagnation with inflation called stagflation. More than likely, that's what we have ahead.
I agree with you, Rob. I'm really glad you brought that. One of the other points that one of the other studies I looked at is in the early 80s. In the 70s, we had massive inflation for a decade. Paul Volcker comes in, raises rates to the moon. Prices start to, real estate prices didn't come down, but they stalled because of the lack of affordability, because of the really high rates. But here's what I looked at, what I was curious about. There are two key things I was really curious about. One was the affordability. I shared those numbers, but here's the second thing. Is in the early 80s, how long did it take what happened to prices? How long did it take for prices to go up? It was 5 years that real estate prices went sideways. That's a long time. Now, so if things aren't affordable, and we're talking right now specifically about real estate, if real estate isn't affordable, I mean, you look at a median price house in Orange County is $1.2 million. That's median. Okay, so that's like, Joe middle income, right? 1.2 million. If they put 10% down, that's 120 grand. But now we're talking $1,080,000 loan with today's rates, property tax, and so on. You're talking like an $8,000, $8,500 mortgage payment or something crazy like that, and that's median. So how long is it going to take? So, Rob, what is your take on how low are rates going to go?
Well, so it's interesting, Mark. We cannot afford a recession. It's impossible because right now we're approaching this year. Our deficit is about 8% of GDP. That means our debt is growing. The level of debt growing 8%. If we slip into a slowing economy, deficits increase dramatically. It could be staggering to have our deficit increase 15 or 20% a year. That's a real possibility because recessions tend to snowball a little bit. So we are slipping into recession. There's a lot of affordability issues. But what happens is their interest rates are going to be cut and they're going to start printing money. There'll be monetary infusions to bring back a boom. So inflation's not going away. There's always this affordability, but another thing, Mark, there's no inventory of homes. There's no homes. So the world is changing dramatically. And we've noticed the wealthy tend to get a little wealthier as time passes. And we're in a troubling period. There's no doubt about that. But knowing about what money is, God is the source of all truth, okay? And wisdom is found in Him and Him only. And Jesus shows us the way, the truth, and life. And this is not about prosperity consciousness. This is about just talking about the world. We're in the world, but we're yearning for heaven. We want to build the kingdom. We want to be a part of the kingdom. And we want to be involved in this generosity of spirit. And we want to bring Jesus into our heart and live our lives through Jesus in a sense. But at the same time, talking about the world is I think it's important for people to understand where we're at today.
So do you see a slowing economy, or you could use the word recession? Now, technically, a recession is 2 quarters of a contracting GDP, right? So do you see a mild recession, no recession, or just a slowing economy?
I think we're already in a recession because the numbers that the government producing are just not false. They're false. I mean, the unemployment numbers they're not. I mean, there are people multiple jobs, and the economy's already in that period of time. This period is slowing. The Fed will respond pretty soon with lower interest rates, and those rates will probably decline quite a bit with additional monetary printing that will re-stimulate the economy, and it will get going.
So we can't go into. So we're talking at, let's say, worst case scenario. In your view, a mild recession.
Remember what happened in COVID? We were going into a depression, snowballing depression. Depression is where there's just no way to get yourself out of it. It's a negative cycle, and so we're headed in the early stages of that. But the government has to, step on the accelerator. It's going to have to do that. And one way to do is push interest rates down. We don't know how low they might go. Inflation's not coming off. Inflation might appear to abate in a slowing economy. It will reaccelerate. That's my view. What do I know? I'm a retired financial guy, but that's my perspective.
Well, and I agree with you, because with respect to real estate, and real estate's kind of the foundation of our economy. If real estate prices collapse, then we've got big kind of problems. But that's not going to happen, because so many people they have these fantastic 3%, 30-year fixed rate mortgages. They're just going to hold on to it. So if prices on properties cannot come down, then how do you make it affordable? There's only one other way. The rates have to come down. And I think we're going to see, and you're right, the rates have started to already improve. They're talking 1 to 2 Fed cuts between now and the end of the year. I think we're going to see 30-year fixed rates next year. I think we're going to be, for sure, low 5s. Right now, a 30-year fixed rate is around 6.5, 6 3/4, something like that. I think by the end of the year, we'll be 1% lower, so that's 5.5, 5 3/4. I think first quarter of next year, we're 4.5, 4 3/4, and property still won't be very affordable, which is kind of the amazing part. So I think we're going to be looking at a slow economy like the early 80s because of the affordability. The economy is totally different today than it was in the early 80s on the bigger picture, which the macro level that you've already talked about. But it's so fascinating to me because of where we are with the debt, and we're in a place where we've never been before. And that reminds me of 2008. 2007, 2008, we were in a place we had never been before with all these horrible, subprime loans, right? And that makes me a little bit nervous. Now, Kenny, getting back to John, your life with money, and at this point, and how you mentioned that you've been able to separate from that. I think that is so critically important. Our title of our show is God, Wisdom, and Money. Tell us how you position yourself kind of mentally, spiritually, emotionally, so that all this nonsense that about money that Ralph and I are talking about as far as the craziness part of it, that doesn't ruin your day.
Yeah, my outlook has really changed a lot. I mean, I don't have the kind of money that I used to have. I'm not going to go out and buy a brand new Mercedes every year. That's just not the type of thing. But I look at money as I have to have enough, my family has to have enough, but my community has to have enough, and a lot of people who are hurting have to have enough. And so basically I want to go out and do what I can to help others. And whatever money I do have, I want to invest wisely. But I no longer say me, as more, I need this and I want to share it. We got involved with a school in the inner city of San Diego in which they start with kids in middle school, and they take them up. These kids have no money at all, basically, and they make them come and study every day, long hours, and they give them great instruction, including religious instruction. It's a Catholic school. And we took this young gal when she was 12 years old, and she was an immigrant kid. And when I met her, she wouldn't even have the self-confidence to even look at me at all whatsoever. And my wife and I tried to encourage her, and we paid for her tuition. And now she's a sophomore in college. And she's this blooming, wonderful, smart person that's going to be a real asset to this country with some of the goals that she has in terms of working for criminal justice. And it's just so exciting to see that person develop. And so I say, the money that we gave to support her education, and she was just assigned to us. We didn't know her from anybody. It warms my heart.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
John, it's such a pleasure having you here today. And I'd like to point out this book, this astounding book. I know it was like number 50 in the country. It rose all the way to number 5.
In its category. And it is in a faith category. But there are something like 70,000 books in that faith category, and it did rise 5 for a short period of time.
Astounding, John. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
But I'd like to talk to you a little about your faith, okay, and happiness and inner peace, okay, because you alluded to that a little bit before. You described that so well in your book. But, John, you learned so much. And faith is a gift, maybe the richest gift we can ever receive except for the love of Christ. But, faith and inner peace and happiness. Can you help us with that a little bit, your perspective?
Well, I learned from life's lessons. And more recently, I've learned from Father Robert Spitzer's 4 levels of happiness. And I look at my life as having traveled through them. That instant gratification is the lowest level when I got the new car or whatever. The second level was when my academy began giving me awards, or my patients were famous people. That's a comparison level, where I compare myself. The guy that practices down the street doesn't have that kind of fame or whatever. And that'll only take you so far. And that's where most people live. Instant gratification, the lowest level, or the comparison level where I've achieved this and I'm happy and I'm proud. And we all need that. And we'll all have that forever. But you really want to move in the third level, which is contributive, where you look at society, the homeless or whomever, or the little kid who's in this school in the inner city, and say, I really want to help this person for no gain for myself. And then what really has filled me is the highest level, which is the transcendent level. This is where I want to operate through beauty, truth, and justice, and look and believe in my God, who I now really believe exists, and have my faith. And so I actually, on a regular basis will just say, God, should I do this? And God, I don't know if it's my inner voice, conscience coming through or whatever, but I get an answer, no, don't do that. or okay, do that and do it this way. And it's funny. I was playing golf yesterday, and we're playing a competition, and my team congratulated me for getting a par on a hole. But I knew that I didn't get a par because I toughed a shot that nobody saw. And I must have spent 30 seconds saying, should I tell them the truth or should I not tell them? Nobody saw it, and they're congratulating me. I said, God, what should I do? Tell them the truth. I said, hey, take that stroke off the card. So anyway, that's where I am. And that gave me a sense of peace, that honesty. And the other thing we have to do is forgive. Forgive everybody that's ever harmed us in our entire life. Make a list and forgive them. You'll never truly be at peace until you've forgiven people, because you don't know what caused them to do that harm to you. They may have been beaten and locked in a closet as a child. You just don't know. And they are God's children. And so that doesn't mean you don't defend yourself, and you're not a wimp. You stand up for what's right and you protect it. Just like we would protect our country if we were attacked in any way. You do that. But in truth, just do what's right, believe in God and principles, and you'll have inner peace.
Thank you, John. Let's go ahead and close with a prayer. Father God, transform our lives into the love of Jesus. Show us the way to live lives of staggering generosity. Turn our duty into delight. John, thank you. It's been a delight to have you today. And I've seen your life turn into this staggering generosity. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, again, thank you, John. Beautiful prayer, Rob. All right, to our audience, thank you for being here with us today, meeting Dr. John Sottosanti. His fantastic book called Mortal Adhesions. Today, you got a feel for what we're trying to accomplish with the show God, Wisdom, and Money. And what that is to bring you people, men, women, even some young people that are in their journey to have, because we all want the same thing. We want love, we want happiness, and we want success in our lives. But how do we make that a reality? It is extremely difficult. John shared his story and his path. We're going to be bringing guests at each show. And here's what's important, is these people are successful. They have learned, they've walked the walk, they have suffered. Learn from them. Meeting people that have made this walk have learned these powerful messages of wisdom, have found that intimacy of God, and found these key elements, including a successful life on this planet. We all want that. And success, we all define success a little bit differently. But that's the purpose of this show, is so you can meet these people and hear their story and learn from them. And if you have questions on our website, feel free to reach out. If you have guests that you want to recommend for us, let us know on the website and we'll reach out to them. But we'll look forward to seeing you at our next show, God, Wisdom, and Money. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, guys.